of discussions about racism. While some of you are members, thank you. While some of you are AAUW members, others may not know about AAUW. We are a national grassroots organization that was established in 1881 with a mission to advance equity for women and girls. We are nonpartisan and we welcome women and men to membership. University affiliation is not necessary for membership, but a 2-year degree or equivalent is. So equity is an important value for us, and our admission to advance equity served as an impetus to launch this series at this time. Before we begin, let me emphasize that this is intended as a discussion. It's not a lecture. As such, we ask that speakers speak, participate, and that you are respectful, civil, and nonpartisan in your contributions. Everyone who wishes to speak will have an opportunity to do so, but we'll have to wait for additional turns until everyone has had one. We will be using the chat feature to call on participants to speak. And Jackie Latzer, my co-facilitator, is shaking her head no. Jackie will now tell you what the process will be if you want to speak. Jackie, unmute.
Okay, thank you, Linda. The way we'll do it, everyone right now is on mute. If you would like to speak, if you go down to your, mine, at the bottom, there is a thing that says participants. And if you can try that now, if you go down, find where it says participants, and there should be a little thing that allows you to, shows a little thing to raise your hand. Can you see that?
No. I see a microphone and a video camera, and that's all. Kathy, you need to unmute.
Hi there. So if you click on the icon where it says participants, what should happen is a list of everybody's name will show up on my screen. It's on the right-hand side of the screen. I'm at the top. Go all the way down to the bottom of that list and you'll see invite, mute me, or raise hand. So that's where you would click raise hand.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. So what we're going to do you find it? Let everybody look for it. And I think I have someone who needs to, is trying to get on. So we'll have to wait a minute. Okay. Did everybody do that? Do you see it? Okay, we have some, if you're participants, you go down to the bottom of the list. It should say raise hand.
Excellent.
Jody's not seeing it. All right, do me a favor. One of you, please, click on raise hand, one of you. Okay, Jody, you did it, you found it. Okay.
So we're all good.
All right, so now I have to lower everybody's hand. Okay.
Excellent.
All right, so this is the way it's going to work. When you would like to speak, you go to that spot, you raise your hand, and then I will call on you. It'll be in the order in which you raised your hand. All right, Linda, so you'll know we'll call on you. Everybody understands that? Okay.
Excellent.
All right, if you give me 1 moment, I'm just going to send somebody a link. I'm going to mute for 1 second. I'm going to disappear.
Okay, and I will go on because there are some things to be said before we start our discussion. George Floyd's horrific murder laid bare the racism that is built into the DNA of our country. As we address racism, we are advised of 3 actions: listen, learn, and speak up. So we begin today with a direct discussion of racism. What is it? Where we've seen evidence of it, and how it impacts individuals and the larger society. We will be using questions that were in the webpage, and I hope everyone has had a chance to read it. I'm certain that we have all seen images of overt and violent instances of racism, but racism exists on a continuum, and we'd like to introduce this discussion with a somewhat more subtle illustration of the microaggressions that people of color endure on a daily basis. Sharing screen. YouTube, there it is. Jackie and I discussed what we wanted to do now. And so you've watched this video. Does anybody have any reaction or comment to it? I see hands up. Katie Haviland, unmute yourself. Can you unmute her, Jackie?
No,
there she is.
I found it. I have to do it over in the corner, not on the top. You could just see several instances where in the department store, the Black person was being followed by someone just to make sure they weren't going to try to steal something. That was the impression that I got. In the restaurant where this couple just decided they did not want to sit in a particular place. They wanted to sit someplace else. And I'm sure there are, other folks are going to see other reactions.
Thank you. Kathy, and I'm not sure which Kathy that is. Just Kathy.
Okay. I found myself becoming very emotional as it was going on. And by the end, I'm finding myself starting to cry because I see so much injustice, that we have people who think of themselves as non-racist, behaving in ways that are very, very racist for no other reason than they just don't know how they're being perceived by somebody who is just going about his day. And I think as a woman, you know, and I'll just speak for myself here, you know, I've gone through my life where there are moments where I have felt, you know, degraded by just a look from men, behaviors, things that were said to me. And so I can very much relate to that gentleman's feelings.
Thank you. Judy Bond.
Well, I hate to admit it, but I did not expect him to be the judge. You get my meaning?
Uh-huh.
I mean, I thought he was nice. In fact, I thought he was kind of handsome, but that's me. And he went along, and I could tell that he was troubled sometimes by things that happened. But when the courtroom came out, I really thought he was going to be the accused, the defendant who was defending himself against some stupid charge that nobody else would bother with. And then finding that he was the judge, it was like, okay, I need to think about this. I took a test once, one of those things you find online, take a test and see. And I did that to see if I had inherent racism, where I thought I didn't. And I did, and I was very embarrassed because I've worked with many, many children as an educator with many different backgrounds. And it never occurred to me that I had any inherent racism. So I was embarrassed.
That, you know, I think that's a realization that many of us are coming to. I've done a great deal of reading in recent months, and each thing I pick up to read, I learn something new, in some measure about myself and my belief system. And I think that's our purpose here. And for the faint-hearted, if you're not willing to receive some bad news about yourself, this is probably not the place to be. Charlene Darlington, how are you?
Okay, good. You see?
You're next.
Okay. All I want to say is that looking at the video, that's been my entire life for 6 to 7 years. So it didn't surprise me. And I've seen it with my son as well as my husband.
You know, as a white person, I haven't experienced it, but I've observed it, and it makes me uncomfortable every time I see it. This may be a little out of order here, but I'm the facilitator, so I guess I can do that. You had a post on Villages News Online not long ago, Darlene, and I'm so glad to see your face. The responses you got to it were horrific. People were not seeing your point, and that was troubling to me. Thank you for sharing that. Mary, unmute.
Okay. I just want to say, as I watched this, it made me realize how subtle something like this could be, where it might just be following a Black person in a store, maybe moving over if a Black person comes in the elevator. I guess I don't really think of that in that sense, but it made me realize that, yes, that definitely is, you know, even though it's very subtle.
Those microaggressions are things that people of color are dealing with on a daily basis. And you can see the discomfort. I'm not sure what it does to the people giving the look, but the impact on the people getting it is profound.
Mm-hmm.
Dottie and Lou.
Hi, I've been struggling with tremendous guilt and beginning of awareness of my own behavior. And in watching this video, the minute they went to the courtroom, I knew he was the judge. I just knew it. And I think of my behavior in growing up in the city, clutching my purse if I was in a neighborhood where I was not comfortable, or seeing people on the street without even being aware. And I've been questioning a lot of things from my childhood in terms of what I was taught. So much of what I was taught was subtle. And I think that laying these things bare, being accountable, and growing and changing, I am hopeful that we will be able to see each other as people. I also think, as women of a certain generation, there is a lack of awareness because I was busy dealing with issues of being a woman and being a Jew, that being a racist was not the top priority in my life. And I'm glad to have the opportunity at this stage of life to learn and to make amends.
Thank you. Nancy Hartshorn.
Yeah.
Did I
hi.
say that right?
You did. Yeah.
Okay.
You know, one thing, first of all, I kept thinking, I wonder what he's feeling. I mean, because in the elevator example, it looked crowded. So, you know, was there really room for him? And so I'm sort of making excuses for all the micro judgments, I guess. But that's because I don't want this to happen, but I need to face it. And then I also thought he's a very attractive man. And so he's much more acceptable to me, you know, to everyone, I think, than some of the Black people who maybe just aren't as attractive. If that was a very attractive man, it would be very much more easy for me to accept him than I would be able to some other people.
That's an interesting comment. I've been reading Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And he talks about, in one of his chapters, the judgments not just between whites and Blacks, but among Blacks, of whose features are more acceptable. Kendi talks about eliminating that perspective, you know, not removing those judgments that lead us into racist ideas. So it's an interesting point. Lynn Hunter. Lynn, where are you? I've lost you on the screen.
In the right-hand side.
There you are.
Here I are.
Thank you.
Above Mary.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of actually workshops on white privilege, which came out of the work of Peggy McIntosh, who started out with male privilege. And some of my work is old now, but I've recently tripped on work by Debbie, whose last name I can't think of right now, who wrote a book called Waking Up White. And she talks a lot about redlining, which I'm old enough to remember that after the GIs came back from World War II, and there were GI bills, which were given to white GIs and not so much to Black and brown GIs. And I've heard a lot of Black people talk about how important it has been to build on real estate. And if they weren't given houses when they came back from World War II, there was no way to build real estate equity. So that's why what you see is a lot of poor people equated with Black people because their housing situations are so poor. White people were giving nice house. The loans went to white people. Banks gave loans to white people, and they didn't give them to Black people, Black and brown people. And so that's why you see ghettos. And it just perpetuated itself. She gives a TED talk. She gives a lot of talks, and her book, Waking Up White, I haven't read it yet, I have to admit, but I have done quite a bit of work. Not recently, to be honest. We read a book called The Hidden Wound by Wendell Berry, which I found really valuable. I was part of some study circles long ago, I must admit, where we worked with Black and white in the study circle and heard a lot from Black people about what they go through, things like pushing money through to the teller who wouldn't touch the money because she was Black, you know, and these little day-by-day things. I went to a furniture store with a Black friend of mine, and before we entered the furniture store, she said, watch, they'll come up to you before they'll come up to me. And that's exactly what happened. I've gone to tag sales with a Black friend, and she said, watch, they'll follow me, they won't follow you. I mean, stuff like that Black people go through every single day of their lives. So there are those day-by-day humiliations. But I think so much of what we see now began with redlining. And I was, I mean, I don't know how old I was, but I remember my parents panicking if, and it was actually Jewish at the time, if a Jew, they would watch if a house in the neighborhood went up for sale, and they would panic if they would watch to see who the realtor brought to see the house. And my father especially, not so much my mother, which is where I think I really got some of this from my dear mother, but my father would lose his mind if he thought a Jewish family was going to move into the house. They were blockbusters. I remember that term as well as anything. God knows if a Black family moved in, and then everybody would move out. But even a Jewish family moving in, people would move out. And my brother and I would have to walk to Sunday school through a small Black community, and my father would just go nuts. I remember being in elementary school in 1954 when Brown versus the Board of Education was enacted. One Black child came to our school, and she was so isolated. I have never forgotten watching her stand against the wall while we played on the playground. And to this day, I regret not going up to her and befriending her. She was all by herself. So goes a long way back.
Yeah, you've witnessed these things. Yeah.
Well, you're my age, so you must have seen it too. I grew up in Maryland.
Yeah. Thank you, Lynn. Jody.
Sorry.
Jody. You're muted, dear. Unmute. There you go.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. In the video, to me, it wasn't so subtle. And maybe because of the times, it wasn't so subtle. Maybe just having seen it in action in real life made it not subtle to me. And what we've taken, I guess, for granted, or what we've not noticed or observed, has been here for so long. I was raised in the South. I had relatives who called Black Americans colored. I had relatives who would refer to them as the girl or the boy. And these are women that we're talking and men that we're talking about. And I used to go to camp in North Carolina, and we would take the train from Miami to North Carolina. And it was at the times in the 1960 where I did see coloreds or whites only in the train stations. At one point we took the buses. So it's very scary. I left the South in 1971 to go to school in the Midwest, having never been the first one in my family to leave the South to go to school outside of the South. And I was shocked because all of that, oh, up north it's different, and it wasn't so different. Up north it was underground, it was under breath. In the south it was open. And it was very eye-opening that all of this fallacy, all of these lies that I had been fed, and I call them lies, was to dehumanize not just one group of people, but several groups of people. And I'm Jewish. As a kid, I was chased by a couple kids in our neighborhood being called a Christ killer. And so, no, can I experience what a person of color experienced? No. Can I empathize? Absolutely. And it's just it's scary that in this day and age that this is still around, that we as human beings have not changed this, whether it's I was reading the articles, the 3 different areas of prejudice. They're there. It's obvious. Like in the film, to me, it was obvious, and it's still obvious to this day.
Thank you. SB. You need to unmute.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. That was very interesting video. I can relate to a couple of them, like going in a restaurant and they would, assign a seat. And if I don't like it, I refuse to sit in there. I said, I want that seat. So what's the problem? So what it taught me with my personal experience, it got me stronger. I find it a challenge. Right from the beginning, when I came in the 60s, I had 2 jobs, a day job and an evening job. My evening job, I can still picture the guy leaning over me. He says, do you realize you're taking someone else's job? So I look up to him. I said, where is that man who wants to do this job? Another incident I had, so I went to McGill University, taking the accountancy course in about 65 thereabouts. There were only 3 women in the class. And I was one of the youngest women, and my seatmate turned around to me, what are you doing here? Another incident, after I got my degree and on my career, my boss sent me to a good company to do the audit job. I introduced myself to the controller, I'm doing the audit, and he said, look at me, he's a tall guy, look at me up and down, are you doing the audit? I said, yes, I am. So the job was done maybe about 2 or 3 weeks thereafter, shook his hand, good to meet you and all the rest of it. Tell your boss to send you again. So what I learned from this experience is it made me a lot stronger. I see it as a challenge, and I try to understand where they're coming from. Yes, they were born here. Here you are, I look different, my color's different, I speak a different language and what have you. They get resentful. Why is he got a job? Why is he doing this job and all that kind of stuff? Why is he here in school? So I don't take it badly. I learn it more like, hey, that was a learning experience. I better know my stuff before I ask him a question. And I gain respect that way. So that is something that I still, in this day and age, with all these issues about racism, I try to understand where they're coming from. Oh, well, maybe because they were born here, because it's their land, and here you are, you're seeing people of different colors and talking different language, they look different. Maybe I would probably send that too, isn't it? So that's where I am getting out of it.
Thank you. We have 2 people one person who would like to speak again. Is there anybody who would like to speak a first time before we go back to Charlene? Jackie.
Thank you, because I can't raise my hand. I found that video when I first saw it, and every time I see it, it takes my breath away. The pain I feel, I can't imagine experiencing that day after day, how that works to erode your sense of self. It's It takes remarkable resilience. The more I realize the things I've taken for granted as far as white privilege, seeing people of color who are successful, I have more and more respect. As I say, the kind of inner strength and resilience required to negotiate this society is remarkable. I know I'm a first generation person. My parents came here from Germany as immigrants, escaping Nazi Germany. And it occurred to me, I wasn't too old, that here they are immigrants. Yes, they were Jewish, so I wasn't aware of when they were looking for housing, I wasn't aware if they were being guided to various neighborhoods. I don't know about that. But I remember thinking, here are folks who are people of color who've been here for generations. They can't live anywhere they want. But my parents, who are new to this country, can live anywhere they want to. And I thought, how unjust is that? Again, I mean, we were grateful that they were able to have a life and create a wonderful life for me. But it occurred to me, how unjust is that? It's even discussing it, I think, I want to comment, I think people are being brave in sharing, to being vulnerable enough for us to share some of these reactions that we're having. And I think that's adding to the richness of this discussion. But it is, I can't imagine, painful just hearing our reactions. I'm looking forward to hearing from Charlene, listening to this. I know just hearing things about, like when Jody shared about being chased, being Jewish, I never experienced any of that, but I know my antenna goes up and my heart starts to race. So I can't even imagine with these continuous micro and macro aggressions, what it must be like day in and day out. So again, the incredible resilience and inner strength that people of color have in order to not just survive, but thrive in this society is remarkable. Thank you.
Thank you. Charlene, you have the last word on this particular piece of our discussion, and then we will move on to the main event.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to respond to some of the comments that I heard, and I am very appreciative of the openness that people are sharing. I think that's a great way to start the conversation. And you referenced a letter that I wrote to the Villages News. I also published that in Talk of the Villages, which generated many comments, but I received comments and personal letters from people who read the letter, and it reaffirmed my belief, which I never lost, that people are genuinely good, and that I wanted that to be a conversation starter, and I also wanted to put a human face to what was said. And I think I did that because my hope was that people would take that information and then they would share it with someone else. I do believe that the comment that you wonder what he was feeling, I know what he was feeling. As I said, I do know what he's feeling. And I can tell you that when I moved here to the Villages 4 years ago, I changed my cars and I went out to Leesburg with a friend of mine, and being a European descent, I knew exactly what was going to happen when I walked in the dealership. Now, I'm the one that's there to buy the car. He never acknowledged that I was there. He never made eye contact with me until I actually spoke up and said, I'm interested in buying the car. She's not. And then the conversation shifted because he turned 5 shades of red and then realized that he had to talk to me. But that was only 4 years ago. So I wanted to remind people that these systems are systemic racism. And I used to think that it was socioeconomic, but it's more than that, because people will see my color first, then they hear me speak. And I've learned to accept that. And as he said, I've learned to thrive in it, and it does make you stronger, but you never forget it. and it does go on every single day, and I know that. I've been very blessed in that I have friends that are very supportive of me throughout my life. And I grew up in a military family, which people would assume naturally that you're isolated. You're not. And I know what it's like to be called the N-word. I know what it's like as a child growing up on military bases, that despite what my father did in his rank, it was his color first. And even when he retired, it was still his color. And when we came back to the States, my father wanted to make sure that I graduated from high school in the States because I'd never gone to a stateside school. And his last base was stationed in Okinawa. And there was a gentleman who was friends with me to this day. And Jerry and I came back at the same time. We went to high school in Okinawa at the same time. But he came back, and I could not go to high school with him because the school system was segregated. And yet I had been in high school with him. And that was the reality of the world that I came back to in the late 60s. But I did want to comment and also share a joke with you all. And it is a joke because it's a reality. That I think someone mentioned about the color of the skin, and people who know me on this chat know that I've told the story before about why I don't drink coffee. And coffee is dark. And my grandmother and grandparents grew up in an age that in order to be successful, you had to be light-skinned if you were of color. So my family never drank coffee because they believed that drinking coffee made you dark, and therefore you weren't going to be successful. And while that is humorous, that is reality. And to this day, I don't drink coffee, but also because I didn't like the taste of it. But yes, I want to just share that with people to lighten up the mood as best you can. And thank you all very much for sharing your openness. And I look forward to learning as well. I'm open to any questions you may want to ask me. But again, as I said to many people in my career, I cannot speak for every person of color. I don't intend to speak. I can only speak for my experiences. And while they have been broad, they are based on a different socioeconomic level than most people have had. Thank you for letting me share that.
Thank you very much. And I want to underscore, we are not looking to you to represent all Black people on the planet. So your comments coming from you and from your heart is really, I think, what we need to hear. Thank you. Okay. So let's start discussing this reading, this Racism 101. I'm going to put the website up on the screen for us, I think. Is it there? Jackie, is it there?
Yes.
Good, okay. This particular article breaks down racism into 3 different levels. Interpersonal racism, institutional racism, and structural or systemic racism. We're going to start with the interpersonal racism. Just as a quick review, this is acts done by an individual that demeans, harasses, excludes, marginalized another individual or a group. Okay, so this is on the individual basis. The first question that they ask here are, can you come up with examples of interpersonal racism that you have seen personally or heard about from the media recently? Interpersonal. Think about that for a minute. I will share one with you. And this came out of a letter to the editor on thevillagesnews.com on the 19th. So it was just the other day. This piece was pulled out of the larger letter, and this is all a quote. There is one question, however, that no one has the courage to ask the complaining race, and that is, what can they do to make themselves more desirable? demanding reparations for acts done years ago is a non-starter. If one looks at history, one will discover that at one time or another, just about every race, ethnicity, religious affiliation was enslaved. What happened in this country is not unique. It requires no reparations. Yeah, Jackie, I just heard your jaw hit the floor. Okay. So that's the question that we are dealing with here. Can you come up with other examples of interpersonal racism? And I would say that the fellow who wrote this, it was a gentleman. He didn't write in capital letters, so I don't think he was yelling at us. And yet I saw this as blatant interpersonal racism. I'm going to unshare this and come back to our look. Here we are. So I toss it out to you. Can you come up with an example or two of interpersonal racism that you have seen or experienced? Lisa Beavers.
Hi. I don't know if this fits the category, but I've heard it from a couple people that have shared with me that they're very frustrated seeing the destruction and the looting and the breaking of glass and that they look at that and not what happened to George Floyd or other issues, but that is the central, you know, my store's being destroyed and I'm not going to have blouses to go buy. But you know, I heard this recently that there was something extraordinarily at an intersection of that destruction, almost the destruction of like an old way of thinking, an old world order, and building something new, because something miraculous happened from seeing the destruction in some of those cities, is that there was hope for humanity, because the next day, people from all different generations, all different cultures came with brooms and Windex bottles and a paper towel to help clean up. You know, so, you know, hearing that, I try to point out to people, look at what humanity has done, and it had to happen, because it's almost like a volcano that's just about ready to burst, and they've had it. You know, I can understand. So I heard it several times. I'm tired of hearing, you know, that people look at just that. I don't know if that fits this category, but.
I think it absolutely does. And I'll elaborate on that. I was talking with my sister. I cannot believe that we were raised in the same home, but I was talking with her shortly after George Floyd's murder and the riots and destruction in Minneapolis and other cities. And she kept coming back to the property damage and the looting. And I kept trying to drag her in the direction of, but do you understand where that's coming from? And it became very clear to me that it was a difference in priority. People on the one hand, as opposed to property on the other hand. And in some ways, I think that speaks to some of the divide that we've got going on in our country right now. People's emphasis may be on the wrong syllable, but that's just me. Thank you. Kathy, and again, we've got
Morton.
several Kathys. I don't know which one. Is it you, Kathy?
Kathy Morton.
Okay.
Hi there.
Kathy.
Hi. So again, I'm not sure this is exactly fit in with the question, but I think it's something that comes to mind for me. So, you know, I've never thought of myself as a racist person. I'm one of those people, you know. I always felt like I wanted to look at somebody's character as opposed to the color of their skin. And, you know, in educating myself over the last, I want to say pretty much 3.5 years, you know, ever since we had this upheaval a couple of years ago. And I've learned how, even though I'm not somebody who is overtly racist, and I've worked very hard to not be, to say, or to do things that are racist. I've learned how, just growing up in this society and by being born white, that I have greatly benefited by things that I was completely oblivious to, right? And so with the murder of George Floyd, I've been doing more of a deeper dive, and it brought me to contact a friend of mine that I used to work with. We were in this very specialized medical group of really super people. And we were predominantly, well, the nurses were predominantly white. And we brought in a woman of color who was just spectacular. We loved her. She fit right in. There was no separation. But what happened was, within a couple of years, I became aware of her trying to bring in additional women of color who, in my opinion, were not quite at the same level. And I actively worked against what she was trying to do for us. And at the time, I believed in my head it was completely because, not because of the color of their skin, but because they didn't quite fit in. They weren't quite, up to the level we needed them to be. And so I've really been able to understand how being born, raised, and completely saturated in this society has altered my perception, because I didn't understand where these other women were coming from, who, by the way, came into our group, made a beautiful, successful transition into our group. And I ultimately ended up being very grateful that they were in our group and working with them. So, but at the time, I didn't. And so what I did was, a few weeks ago, I called her and I said to her that I just needed her to know how much I appreciated what she did for us. And it was important that she knew that she made a difference in our group. And there isn't, none of us can go back and undo the mistakes we've had in our past, right? We become aware of them, that it's ancient history. But I still had her in my contacts. And I thought, if nothing else, to be able to tell her that even a few years later, I can now appreciate what she did, may help to take away, it doesn't take away the micro and macro aggressions that she has to deal with all day, every day, but maybe it helps her to know that she is being successful in her efforts. And so I would put that out there as something that each one of us, we may be able to find these opportunities where we can share with people that even though we made a mistake in the past, somehow there's an appreciation for what any individual is trying to do for us, even if we didn't understand it at the time. I don't know, I think I'm going off topic a little bit now, but I hope you guys understand what I'm trying to say.
Thanks, Kathy. I think we do. Let me make a quick comment here, because this has come up a number of times. Next month, we're going to be dealing with the issue of white privilege, because it's huge. And I think Lynn mentioned it. Several other people have mentioned it. It's an important point for us to consider, because most of us probably have never thought about it. The other thing that I would like to comment on, many of us have said, I'm not a racist. I've never thought of myself as a racist. I said earlier, I've been reading Kenby's book, and so I'm kind of wading around in the anti-racist place. He actually was interviewed by Don Lemon on CNN the other night, and he made a comment that I think we need to think about and talk about, and it's likely to come up in this series again, but I'll throw it out there now. He said that to say I'm not a racist is to do nothing. It's not an action statement. And by saying that and doing nothing, the racism continues, it allows persistence of it, and it makes us complicit. But if we say we are anti-racist, that gives us some action to take, and we can actively challenge racist policy and power. So I urge you to start thinking in anti-racist terms, because it says that we are on the forefront of this fight, and that we will not tolerate any longer these racist policies and power struggles in our country. So a couple things to think about. Judy Bond, you were next. You're muted, dear.
Was I mute? Okay.
Now you're not. Okay.
Okay. I think I may have forgotten most of what I wanted to say, but the one thing that I do remember was that at the beginning of this discussion about interpersonal racism, I didn't know if this fit in, but someone very close to me, we were watching the, I don't want to call it, the protests after the George Floyd murder. And this person said to me, that's why they never get anywhere, because the first thing they do is turn around and destroy their own place.
We call that blaming the victim.
Oh, yeah, we call it, yeah. And I was shocked.
See, and I think now, and it may just be because I'm getting mouthier as I get older.
Oh, I am too.
My husband says I've always been pretty mouthy. Imagine that. Hearing something like that, I would challenge it now and might not have at some past point, because that to me is an absolute example of implicit interpersonal racism. Why else would you say something horrific like that?
I don't see it as implicit. I see it as explicit racism.
Well, implicit.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah, but explicitly expressed. Yeah.
As I said, I was shocked. I would have said more, but I considered the company I was in, and I just figured, it's not worth it. He'll never change.
And for me, it's more and more worth it. But I think that's a very personal decision. Thanks, Judy. Judy Reinhardt, you're next. Judy Reinhardt, where are you? I keep losing you. There you are. You're muted, dear.
Unmute.
Now you're unmuted.
All right, good. I have a dear friend in St. Louis who teases me about our golf cart rally. And I said, well, look at your assault weapon people in St. Louis. And so she sent me an article from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that it's all public record, that this lawyer couple have sued people their whole lives, including suing his father for property that he was supposedly got as a birthday gift when he was 5 years old. And I look at that, and there are people that are defending these people. What if they were Black and had done the same thing? These people are not nice people. They have a whole life history of causing trouble. But yet there are people that sort of glorify their stand against people who are just coming in on a sidewalk and on property that really was not their property. It's been contested property for a number of years within that homeowners association. So it's like it's getting a lot of press, but nobody goes deeper to see what are those people? Who are they? They're not nice people. And if they were Black defending their property, it would be a whole different news story.
That's an interesting point. And it reminds me of a TED Talk a few years ago. I can't tell you who the presenter was. I think it may have been Joy DeGruy, but don't quote me on that. And she was talking to auditorium full of white people. And she said, if you were treated the way Black people are treated in this country and it would be okay with you, raise your hand. And nobody moved a muscle. She said, maybe you didn't understand. Let me ask you again. If you would be okay being treated the way Black people are treated in this country, raise your hand. And nobody moved a muscle. She said, that means you know what's happening and you're not doing a thing about it. So I think it speaks to your point, Judy, you know, what's happening here?
Right.
And we need to know what's happening here. And it may not have happened to us, but it's happening and it needs to be acknowledged. Okay, we've got 3 more people with their hands up. I'm going to ask you to make your comments relatively quickly so we can move on. I suspect we could be here for the rest of the afternoon talking, but all good things must end. Lynn, you're next. And I've lost you again.
If it is.
There you are.
Whoops, am I unmuted?
Nope, yeah, you're good. I can hear you.
Thanks, Jackie. I don't know how constructive it is to talk about what's going wrong. I think that, I mean, somebody much wiser than I said, you know, these problems are created on the level of humanity. You know, we're the ones that set up those barriers. We're the ones that created this problem. You know, God created us as one human family. We're the ones that created all these divisions so that we could be superior to somebody. You know, we did that to make ourselves feel good. You know, we needed somebody to be underneath us so we could be above them. I think problems like that created on this level really can only be solved, excuse me, on the next level, which is spiritual. You know, I think it doesn't do us any good to dwell on. Every time there's this force, another force comes along against it. So you get a force and a force, and all you get is really 2 forces fighting each other, ugly as they are. I mean, has anything been solved by those 2 forces coming together and fighting each other? I
think it's raised awareness at this.
It's raised awareness,
and that
right? And some legislation has come out of this. But I mean, I really think until we change hearts, until we really acknowledge the oneness of the human family, I'm not sure it's really going to get there. Until we really understand in our hearts that we're all really one and that everybody is our brother and sister and we take care of each other. I don't think until we really get, I know that sounds like pie in the sky, but I think that's where we're headed and we've got to head there. I really do.
I think on an interpersonal level, you're absolutely correct. But there are other levels beyond the interpersonal level where change can be made. And it may or may not change people's attitudes, but it may well change their behavior. So that's an interesting point. Arlene, you're next. Unmute. You're
okay,
unmuted.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. This has been going on for many, many years. I mean, I was a teacher in Fort Lauderdale in an inner city school, and most of my students were Black, brown, inner city Fort Lauderdale. And I saw this every single day. I even worked with Black teachers that we became very good friends. And when we went out to socialize with the parents or with the teachers, I saw a lot of this interpersonal kind of behavior. And I'm so glad that this is coming now to everybody's attention because it's needed. I've 20 years in Fort Lauderdale. I saw it in New York, what I taught there. All the teachers got together and we kind of rallied around the brown and Black teachers. And we got a lot done. We really, really did. And I fought for this all my life. And being Jewish, I had a lot of anti-Semitism in some of the schools that I was teaching in. So I know how they felt. I mean, being white, I could pass for Catholic, I could for any Protestant, and I'm blonde, blue-eyed, so that helps it also. But being Black, is very, very difficult because you can't hide your skin color. And I really am for this movement, and I hope it really gets to be accomplished, a lot of stuff. So I
Thank
am
you.
for it. Yeah.
Thank you. Charlene. Unmute.
I can't do it. You'll have to do it yourself, Charlene.
There you go.
Had it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to comment about the interpersonal racism. I have too many examples, as you can imagine, to share, but I wanted to share one that affected my nieces. And the reason why I reference that is because I had to have a conversation with them because their mother was too emotionally involved with it. But my sister's husband was Belgian. And by being Belgian, he was a person of European descent. And they were out one day and with his two daughters. One daughter looked exactly like him, blonde hair, blue eyes. The other one did not. She looked like my sister, very brown skinned. Anyway, they went to a restaurant and they were asked, a couple, I was really amazed, but a couple came up and asked, what was he doing with that little in child? Now that's his daughter. And she was very upset. He was very upset. So we had to have a conversation, but my sister was too upset to try and explain to her daughters. And I remember talking to my niece Lane about the difference between her sister's color and her color and trying to reconcile so that she would not feel less than. But it doesn't matter what age someone is, the conversation still needs to be had. And for everyone that's talking about, you know, we can't do our past, we can't, but we can have a conversation as such we're doing now to try and influence a next generation because they're the ones that are going to make the change.
Yes, absolutely. Dottie and Lou. There you go.
In 1960, I was a psychology major at City College of New York. My professor, Dr. Kenneth Clark, was the African-American psychologist whose study on separate but equal was cited in the Kansas Brown versus Topeka Supreme Court decision for integration. As part of our studies in that course in child psychology, we spent a lot of time at inner city schools in Harlem. And Dr. Clark, whom taught me 60 years ago, said one of many things that I will never forget. He said, you can't mandate attitude, but you sure can mandate behavior. And much as I would love to believe that we have to change in our heart before we can change, I don't believe that's true. We can mandate behavior. You can sit next to me at a Woolworth counter and we can eat lunch, but I don't have to like it. And that has been Dr. Clark's lasting impact on me. I had the great pleasure in the 90s of getting into an elevator in California at a professional conference and seeing Dr. Clark. He, of course, did not know who I was, but I was able to go up to him and thank him for the influence he made in my life. And it's a very rare thing that that happens. So you can mandate behavior, but you can't mandate attitude.
Well, and that's absolutely correct. We've said many times over the years, you can't legislate morality. Would that we could. But I think this part of our discussion brings us to the second piece, which is institutional racism. I think that those of us engaging in these kinds of conversations are attempting to address the interpersonal racism that we may be experiencing in our lives or seeing in other people's lives. But this institutional racism is so insidious and so pervasive. Can you think of examples of institutional racism in our society?